I'm going to get started now. People can trickle in, and then if there are questions, please throw it out.
Hi, this session is about onboarding volunteers the right way. I'm Josie, and I am an advisor here at Better Impact. I've been an advisor here since 2022, and prior to that, I was a volunteer manager for about 12 years. And 4 of those years, I used Better Impact myself. So I've come over to this role, worked with hundreds of different volunteer managers in all different industries, all different size programs. As you know, I've spent my time here and coming from being a former user myself of the software. So I have done the journey of implementing Better Impact software and onboarding my own volunteers into that software, as well as helping hundreds of other volunteer managers do the same for their own program. So today we're going to talk about onboarding volunteers and having a onboarding process that is clearly defined is important for any type of program. So this is important for large programs, small programs, any type of industry, any type of volunteer role, right? So if we have ongoing volunteers that come week after week for your program, or we have one-time volunteers that do a special event for you on, a fundraiser. All volunteers should have some type of screening or onboarding process to enter your program. So today we're going to talk about why is that screening, why is that process important? Where do you begin, whether you have a process in place or you really need to start one for your own program? And then effective tracking for that program. So what are the steps you need to take to track somebody through their journey onboarding into your program so that you know who they are, so that they aren't lagging in any of those steps, and so that your volunteer process is efficient for you and for the volunteer. So we're going to start with why is screening important? Why is it important to have a volunteer onboarding process, regardless of the size of your program? First, volunteers represent your organization. Not all volunteer programs have public-facing volunteers, but they are representing the work you do. They are representing you whenever they're working for you at an event, in your organization's office, in a hospital, in your animal shelter, wherever your volunteers are working, they're representing your organization. So knowing who they are and having brought them through your process to become part of your organization is important. For many organizations, many types of industries, there are requirements from leadership, from HR. There's also legal requirements for people volunteering in the type of work that you do. So depending on what the type of work is, there might be requirements. So getting a lot of those started when somebody walks through the door wanting to volunteer is a really important part of screening. From the volunteer's perspective, it sets expectations. So part of onboarding processes usually include an introduction to your organization. It might include those requirements needed to work with your type of work, to work with if they're offering services to other people, how to do that work. And it really starts to set the tone for that volunteer about how that work is going to go with you and your team and your organization. And then the final point here is that it really is the first step in volunteer retention. And from my own experience, when I walked into the volunteer program at my previous organization, the volunteers were like texting our staff to come in periodically, and it was sort of random when they would come in. And then as we began to structure our program, so having people apply and fill out a little application so that we know who they are, having them take a couple of steps before they were able to come in and actually volunteer. They knew what to expect from us. And in turn, we ended up with more dedication from them. So, in the beginning, when it was sort of, random and initiated by them, it was a little bit less predictable for everybody, including them. They didn't know if we needed them, and we didn't know when they were coming. And then by the end, when we had a lot of structure in place, suddenly not only were those volunteers coming more often and on a more regular basis, we also had grown the program by leaps and bounds because more people were attracted to the program because they knew exactly what to expect, exactly what we needed from it. And that really starts at the beginning. It starts with your recruitment, advertising the program, and then as people walk in the door and say, I'd like to volunteer, what those steps are for them as they're coming in as a volunteer. So next we're going to talk about where to begin. So where to begin really speaks to any type of organization. So whether you need to begin as in you don't have any steps yet, or your steps are minimal and really you feel like it's time for more steps, or you're a huge program already, you have a lot of steps in place, a well-established onboarding process, and you're ready to reanalyze how that's going for you. Where you begin anytime that you are modifying or beginning a onboarding process for your volunteer program is to think about your different volunteer roles. What are your different roles individually? And when I say roles, I mean positions, needs that are met by volunteers, different jobs that they do for you at your organization. Those are the different roles. So when I say roles, that's what I mean. And so the first thing that we do is think about each of those roles individually and what do you need from them? So is the expectation that they're coming one time or they're coming once a year for a special event? Is the expectation that they have an hourly time commitment every month? Is the expectation just that you'll have opportunities available and you expect them to be on the schedule and then, let you know if they're not coming? So what are the expectations for those different roles? In addition to that, what are the steps that each of those roles needs to take to become a volunteer? So if we have somebody that's going to do a special event and that special event doesn't require a ton of screening, those steps will look different from somebody coming in to work in the medical industry that's going to be working patient-facing role. That person's going to have a lot more screening steps they need to take before they can volunteer. So role by role, position by position, analyzing what are the steps that need to happen. Do we currently do those steps? And then if not, how can we put those steps in place? So creating a plan. What are the steps and how can we start implementing those steps with volunteers? And step 2 is going to be streamlining those steps and mapping out the plan for those onboarding steps. So what sometimes happens is as a program develops, we end up with extra steps or we are in a rush to get volunteers in the door and we don't have enough steps. And so after figuring out, okay, here are all of our positions, here are all the requirements for each of those positions, we now can look at, is that process going to work for us? Are we going to get all the information we need? Are we gathering too much information on our volunteers? Do we not need that much right out of the gate as we're onboarding somebody into a position? And then map out the finalized steps. We've finalized what the steps are for each of those roles. When do each of those steps happen? So somebody fills out an application as step 1. What do we do next? Do we have an interview? Do we have orientation? Do we have training? Do we have a shadowing shift? Do we have paperwork, a background check? So what are each of those steps and what is the order those need to happen in? Part of that map might also be how those items get delivered to the volunteer. Are they delivered via email? Are they doing things in person? Are they signing up to be on the schedule for something? So once the steps are established, mapping out the order for each of those positions. What order do each of those things happen in and how is that delivered to the volunteer? And what is expected from the volunteer to confirm that those steps have been completed? And then step 3 is set up our tracking tools. So no matter the size of the program, as you are formalizing these processes and onboarding volunteers, we really need to know where someone is at in the process, right? So they come in the door, they fill out an application. If they're coming into a role that requires a lot of steps to onboard, you're going to need to be able to know where they are so that you can either remind them on a step that they might be lagging on so that you can move them along as needed, really continue to assess whether they are the right fit for that role, etc. So having a really clear and clean way to track those steps makes it faster and more efficient for you and the volunteer that's going through the process.
I got a few questions that have come up, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, great.
One says we have a process in place, but and if it is appropriate to reevaluate our current process.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so one indicator that it might be a good time to reevaluate a process is if that process is hard to do or is unclear. So if anyone who is part of the process seems to be regularly confused by it, if it's hard to follow for the volunteer, it might be time to kind of run through these steps again to look at what the process is. Are there steps that don't need to be there? Are parts of them not being clearly communicated? Is there one person managing that for each of those positions, or is it being managed by a group? And is there someone that can take the lead on that? So that would be one time to reanalyze a program. Another time to reanalyze a program is if you are looking at a new volunteer management software. That is an excellent time to reevaluate all processes. And so in my own experience, when I came to Better Impact, we shifted almost all of our processes at that point so that we could really formalize them. And we're able to do that using the tools in the software. So it kind of gave us some guidance on what way we were going to restructure those things. But that is another great time because whenever you change software to whichever software it is, there are going to be different types of functionality that may or may not support exactly how you do something right now. And so it may be that's another good time to really rework or reanalyze different parts of the process, even if it's well established already.
That's great. Another one came in that says they're concerned that adding screening process would
Mhm.
potentially deter volunteers from my program.
Oh, yes, that's a great question. So it feels like, so if you are a program that does not currently have much of an onboarding process, it certainly can feel like you are going to be turning people away. You're putting up a barrier to volunteer because you now have steps before you're allowed to actually come in and volunteer. And I definitely hear that. Again, in my own experience, we went through that as well, worried that the people that had already been coming, like I mentioned at the beginning, worried that the people that had already been coming on their own would suddenly feel like we were pushing them away with the process. But I will say that once we established a process, it really matters that volunteers know what to expect and that they have that structure to fall back on. They will become actually more dedicated to the process. What it also does is it weeds out unreliable volunteers. So there are folks who get excited about volunteering, but in the end aren't actually able to volunteer for whatever reason. They're not a good fit. They don't have the time actually, even though they'd like to have the time. Good intentions, they want to volunteer, but actually turns out they don't have the time. And establishing some structure to, of course, what we're talking about today, onboarding, but also the program itself. What are your available times for people to volunteer? How often do you expect them to come? That type of structure actually is really the first step in creating a program where volunteers stick around and they come back over and over and over again. So I would say that while I completely understand the sentiment of I don't want to put up barriers to volunteering, in the end, I actually think the opposite is true, that while without structure, we have a barrier to volunteer because the volunteer doesn't know what the needs are, what needs they can meet, what positions are available, and how they can actually help the organization. And usually the mission of the organization is really what they're passionate about. So knowing how they can help and what they need to do to help is always a way to keep them around as opposed to having a quick just come in whenever, which over time does not allow program growth and is not going to scale with your program.
That's wonderful. There was one more that came in. Would you share that process with potential volunteer?
The onboarding process.
Hmm.
Yeah, so depending on what the process is, it's usually a great idea at the beginning. So either wherever they are interacting with the volunteer program, so whether that's your website, whether that's at like, a recruitment event or somewhere where you might just meet somebody and you're talking about the fact that you have a volunteer program, um, at that point, having some information about each of the different volunteer roles that you offer. And so I would say that that's where you would start providing information about the commitment level. So when you have a volunteer something that's coming in for something where there's not a lot of screening, so special events or general maintenance of something within the organization, those types of recruitment areas might have a little bit of information about, apply here and then join us for an orientation. And then if you're recruiting for something that is much more extensive, again, like a medical industry type volunteer, in those cases, it is probably a good idea to outline right up front the different things that will be required as part of that position. So, it's kind of twofold. You're advertising it in a way that's appealing and recruiting people, but also managing those expectations about what to expect for those steps. And then part of the application process, as we'll look at later, will be to outline those steps and then have a method for delivering those steps to the volunteer.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about effective tracking. And the reason I say effective tracking is because there are lots of ways to track what's happening. And, we work with a lot of people that are tracking things on spreadsheets or via email in a variety of different places. And that will track the steps of a program. But effective tracking is time saving and efficient for the volunteer manager and for the volunteer. So it really efficiently moves people through the steps as they complete those steps. It also provides a way for you to check in on people who are lagging behind on those steps. Because it doesn't save anyone time if there are lots of people in the queue that just never take those steps. So finding a way to track the program that really allows you to know where people are at any given time and how long you expect them to sit in that spot and how long you'll give them before they get a reminder, etc. But designing that into how you track. Tracking is also customized based on those individual roles and positions. So very few organizations have a one-size-fits-all screening process. It does happen. There are some organizations that have a volunteer program that is, just one role or just a couple of roles. And really, if they just go through the same kind of onboarding, they're set for that specific organization. But for the most part, there are different roles available. In my own experience, we had gardeners, we had educators, we had special event volunteers, and some of those overlapped, right? People would do volunteering in the gardens and also in education. And so the tracking of each of those roles was specific to those roles because they had different needs. I had different needs for training, for paperwork, for what they needed to do before they were allowed to come in and do that work. And so the effective tracking needs to make sure that you're able to do that differently for each of those different types of positions. And then finally, just to add that we are still, even though we're talking about kind of standardization and giving these really well-planned and very structured steps to volunteers, that we're still retaining that personal touch with our volunteers. We're still reaching out to them individually. We're still giving them that feeling that they themselves individually are making an impact in our organization. And so I add this into the tracking because part of tracking is communication. And that communication should offer that personal touch to our volunteers because they are dedicating their time to our organization. So I'm gonna switch gears now and just talk a little bit about using Better Impact for onboarding volunteers. I have an example here of an account where we might be tracking a volunteer who has applied into our program. And so for anybody who has not seen Better Impact software before, this is our main home admin dashboard. And what I'm going to focus on today is just to show you a couple of areas where you would both monitor, track, and communicate with somebody who's onboarding into your system. So if you notice here, we have these status bubbles is what we call them. So these are different statuses in our software. So when somebody comes in and applies and they fill out our application, so they've looked at our website, they have decided that they're interested in one or more position that we offer, and they filled out our application in Better Impact. Better Impact creates a profile at that point. So now we have a way to track them. And this is really a key part of the initial onboarding of this volunteer. This volunteer has a profile in our system. This person may or may not become a volunteer. If they don't meet the requirements to come into our program, then we will be tracking that. We will be following it. We will be doing our best to get them through the process. But if they do not meet the steps, or they reach out and they say, actually, I don't have the time to do this, or whatever happens, then we can track that part of the process as well by archiving them. So the steps here to start in this system are that we recruit the volunteer or the interested person in volunteering. They fill out our application so that we can start tracking their journey, and they come in as an applicant. And from there, we track all of our special steps for whatever it is they're interested in doing. So I'm going to open up one of these applicants to show how we might do that for this person. So here we have our 2 applicants, and I'm going to open up Therese. And we can see some information here. And in our software, how we know what somebody is applying for is we take a look at their general interest. So I'm going to pop in and see what is it that Therese wanted to do in our organization. And you can see here that we have a number of options that she could have selected, but she has selected that she would like to volunteer with the reception desk. So now I immediately know that there is a list of steps that she will do next in order to become a reception desk volunteer. She will probably have to have an interview, and then she will have to do some training. She might have to fill out some paperwork. So any of those steps that we have defined for this role are now ready to be set in motion. We're able to screen information about this person through our custom fields. We can see what they've filled out about themselves to get an initial idea of who they are, why they want to volunteer, if they have any experience, all of that type of information. And then we have a list of qualifications to start to track these steps for this person. So you can see here that we have some sample onboarding steps that might be here where we can indicate things that we're learning about this person. And so what I'm able to do here is, as Therese moves through the process to become a reception desk person, a reception desk volunteer, I will be able to track them as she goes. So I might be able to say, okay, she indicated that she'd like to work at the reception desk. I see from her custom fields that she may be a good fit. So I am going to mark her as in training for this role. This allows me to do a number of things. One, I now will be able to pull a list of people based on this piece of information. I can say, I'd like to know who's training right now for the reception desk and send them information about training. Or I can see, I want to see all my applicants who are currently working towards becoming a reception desk volunteer. So I have a number of ways to use this information to monitor the steps as this person goes down the line. What I can do now that I've marked her as in training is I can also send her down the next step of this process by sending her an email. So I can go directly to her communications tab, and I can say, I want to use the template that we have here to schedule a phone interview. That's going to be the first step for our reception desk, is we need to schedule a phone interview. So this email template right here will use her first name. So it will say, hi, Therese. And then it sends her the information about scheduling a phone interview. And then I can send the email and begin those steps. When she has her interview, then I can offer her orientation. I can offer her additional training. And she can, again, move through those steps as she becomes a reception desk volunteer.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. A couple more questions came in. So we have one that says, should I have a step before the Better Impact application form?
Oh, that's a good question. Right. So some organizations will start out their kind of volunteer application process with an interest form or with some kind of communication to, I don't know, assess if the person's maybe a good fit prior to giving them a profile and Better Impact. But what I typically recommend is actually just having them apply straight into the software. And that is because we have all of the tools in place where you can track if they end up not being a good fit. So it gives you that history. So if they've come in as an applicant and they end up not being a good fit, you have them as an archived volunteer so that you can understand later if they were to come back or reach out again, that they've come in before. Some people will also, Better Impact has up to 3 application forms. And so sometimes people will have a shorter interest form as one of those application forms to start. So if you have a really extensive onboarding process, or if you have a really extensive application for people who end up being very serious about a role that requires a lot of information, then sometimes they'll set it up so that the initial touch, the initial application is really short and just gets the basic information that you need. And then when they've indicated they want to do that role that is really extensive, then they are given that second form to get all of that extra information that they need for that role.
Perfect. The other question was, what if someone applies and they are not a good fit? How would you handle that?
Yeah, so that is another thing that can be planned for in these tracking tools. So some of the things we've looked at here are being able to, once the steps are all outlined and designed, right, like we talked about at the beginning, once those steps are all designed, they're built directly into the system. So we have a way to track whether or not they've done this step, and communications can be made to go out to each of those folks. And so what we usually recommend is also having steps in place for people who are lagging behind or turn out to not be a good fit. So that would be email templates that are there for, any type of communication about not being the right fit if needed. And if that's appropriate, sometimes people like to have that conversation over the phone. Um, and then and then having points at each step where it's decided that that person has now officially dropped out of the running to become a volunteer, right? So like if you are working through having an interview and then an orientation and then some training, and each of those steps, it would say, okay, somebody has applied, they have 2 weeks to sign up for an interview before we'll remind them. And then if we remind them and another week goes by and we haven't heard anything, then we send the email that says, it looks like you're no longer interested in volunteering. Please reach out to us if you'd like to volunteer in the future, right? So that step has been cut off, they get archived, and they move out of your queue of active people working towards volunteering. Same thing if that happens midstream further along, right? Like they do everything, but they get to training and they just never sign up for training. They never go, they never, reach out about it. How much time before you send a reminder? You send the reminder, and then if they drop off the map, send the email. It looks like you're no longer interested in volunteering because these were the requirements. Please reach out to us if you are interested in the future. And then archive them. So what we're doing is making sure that we're maintaining our flow of volunteers to be people who are actively completing the steps. And there are a number of tools in the software as well to help you with finding those folks as needed. So like for reminders, we can see that we have here, like this is called a saved search, and this allows me to pull up a list of applicants who have not completed orientation. So I can see there's one applicant who hasn't done orientation yet, and so it may be time for me to remind that person to do orientation. So there are a number of tools that we set up to help us make this efficient and time saving as we move folks through those steps, whether or not they are completing them.
That one's great. Perfect. There's a couple more if you got time. Let's see. What if I forget a step later in the process, going back to reapply?
Yeah. So if a volunteer is skipping steps, it is clear. So when you have your onboarding steps outlined within each person's profile or however that you're tracking it, you're able to look back at the steps and find that misstep. There are also some safeguards if you're using Better Impact, there are safeguards in our software where opportunities aren't available to people who haven't met all of the criteria. And so there will be also a kind of stopgap where the volunteer might say, I can't sign up for anything. And you'd be able to double check what step was missed. And so that's one thing. So if the one step was missed and it didn't get, it wasn't caught. However, if somebody has completely dropped off the map, gets archived and comes back and says, hi, I do want to volunteer, and you would like them to be able to volunteer, there's a number of ways to get them going again with that same profile. So you would be able to have them reapply. If it's been a long time and you want fresh information from them, our application allows existing profiles to fill out fresh information. Or you may choose to just administratively move their profile back in as an applicant and work with them again through those steps. And again, their profile is going to retain the information of what they did before and what they didn't. And you can decide, what steps do they need to redo? Is it all of them, or do they just need to pick up where they left off?
That's great. Last one that came in, and we will get to all these questions. If we don't get to it in this session, we'll get an answer to you. But um,
Yeah,
how does the process look for an older population that may not be as tech savvy?
that's a great question. So these processes, depending on the program and what the steps are easy to tailor to really any level of understanding of technology. First of all, Better Impact's volunteer interface is really simple, much simpler than the administrator side that we're looking at now. And what the application experience is for a volunteer using Better Impact, I'm going to just show you a sample of it. What our volunteer application looks like to a volunteer is they click on the link to the application and they just begin by creating a username and putting in an email address. And then they fill out required fields to move through the application. Um, and then all of your custom information that you've created for it. So this part of it is like filling out any online form. So if they are comfortable filling out an online form, they will be able to do this easily. Um, for folks who do not have access to the internet or are not able to fill out something like this, a lot of organizations will offer a device on site or some special help for using the software or for filling out an application like this. And any information can be updated or added or fixed by an administrator. And so for those volunteers who truly can't use software for whatever reason, whether it is, because they don't like to or because they aren't able to, truly aren't able to, there's a number of ways to track somebody in the system, whether or not they are involved.
That one's great. One last one. This one will be a challenging one. So the process we have, the system that we're currently using, doesn't offer the features that you're showing here. How would you manage us handling it if we're not a Better Impact user?
So ask that again.
The system that we're currently using doesn't have the fields that you were showing on your platform.
Mm,
How
yeah.
could I manage that as in my current process?
Yeah. So depending on what your software does offer, what you would want to look at is coming back to that initial um, process that we looked at here and really starting at, do I know what my steps are and what are they? And then, working with the features within your own software, and or if you need a secondary support for that software like Excel, but finding a way to, once those steps are clearly outlined for you, and then you have mapped out what it looks like between you and the volunteer for those steps, um, building into hopefully features that do exist in your software, a way to mark off, check off, report on, make a note about each of those steps. And the important piece is being able to look at somebody and figure out where they are in the process and what needs to happen next. And ideally be able to see how long it's been, and have those time pieces in place so that you aren't letting people lag for long periods of time and sit in your queue, right? And kind of muck up your volunteer software with people who aren't actually going to volunteer. And so the goal is to both successfully bring people on while making sure that you also have a way to weed out anybody who's actually not going to make it through. And I think that's possible really with any tracking tools, as long as you are clear about each of those steps and how those steps get delivered and what the marker is for somebody having completed those steps. The other piece that is, possible in Better Impact that I think is hopefully possible as well in other software is being able to monitor those things in bulk. And so when we looked at, these searches here, if I had 30 applicants, I would be able to quickly pull up a list of people who need to do orientation and how long ago they'd apply so that I could remind them all at once. And as a program grows or the bigger the program is, the more important it is to be able to do those things in groups rather than one at a time. And so I would say, the first step in any tracking tool is to make sure that you know what the steps are and that you can actually monitor it for each person. And then I think the more sort of advanced look at this is how, like, when we have, we can all be hopeful, when we have 30 applicants, how can we manage these steps for those 30 people without having to have somebody sit there and do it one at a time?
Perfect.
Um, okay, I am going to head off, but I know there is going to be a Q&A at the end. And so if we didn't answer your question just now, I know we'll be able to either answer them at the end of the session or at a later time.
That was a lot of information, Angela, wasn't it?
I am excited. It was great. And I mean, ditto to everything and support what she said. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, strong process. I hear it all the time when people talk to me. Like, I'm worried it's going to be too involved. I'm going to scare people away.
Yep.
It's, I would not consider that. I would say that, when someone is going through a process, they're showing their commitment. If they can't give you that amount of time now, how reliable are they going to be later? And so it's very good points. And we are showing a lot of stuff in the Better Impact system. Hopefully your system has all these fields and values. If it doesn't, there may be other ways that you could track it, try to get creative with it. But we did get a lot of questions, but we are going to kick it off with a poll. I'd love to kind of get an answer from everybody. What's your biggest challenges with volunteer onboarding right now? See what the consensus is of the group. Lots of overwhelming. Getting volunteers to stay engaged is coming out on top. Seems like setting clear expectations. That was a good question that came in through the chat. We had one of those, setting, is it appropriate to set expectations? Which, yes,
Yes.
I think it 100% is. All right, we'll give it a couple more seconds here.
Think about it. If you don't know the expectations, you don't know if they're fulfilling it, and they don't know if they're fulfilling it. So
Yep.
yes, 100% as crystal clear as possible.
Yeah, so we got some good results. Getting volunteers to stay engaged after orientation.
Yep.
Any gut thoughts there?
I think a lot of things, Josie touched on some, but I think part of it is, are they matched correctly? And like to the like these little, I call them little soft speed bumps. You don't want to put up barriers that you don't need so the volunteers can't volunteer with you. I mean, there's those that are just like, you're not being aware of it's stopping people from volunteering with you at all. But there's little speed bumps. They have to do it online. There's a background check. There's in-person training. There's on, and it depends on your organization. If you're doing like a fun run, maybe you don't need all of that. And so it really depends on your event, your role, your organization, who your population is. There's so many variables to all of this that it just depends. But I think too, reminders and showing impact, like how do they connect? And once they connect, that helps. I have a volunteer that actually calls a team of volunteers actually that call new applicants about a week or two or a month after they've come on board, and they just call and say, hey, I'm a fellow volunteer. Where are you in the process? Need some help?
Yeah.
So
I
that
love
helps.
that. That's a good piece of advice. Yeah, you want to get the data you need, but you don't want to overwhelm them. So
Right.
there's a fine line. Michelle in the chat also asks, is it appropriate or a good idea for organizations to say, we need help and volunteers in this area? And I would say,
Yes.
absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
better. It's so much better. I'm sorry. I'm like, yes. Make it as defined as possible, because then the volunteer is very crystal clear if that's the best fit for them or not. If they're expecting, because we don't know what they're thinking. If you're a shelter and you need people to walk dogs and they're thinking they're going to be cuddling puppies,
Yeah.
you have to be really clear. Or really you need help like cleaning out the cat litter, and they're like thinking they're going to be, whatever. You need to be really clear.
I agree. Yeah, if I show up to think I'm gonna snuggle puppies and I'm in the cat litter room, I'm not gonna be happy about that. And then
No.
I will probably not come back as a volunteer. So that's counterproductive.
Yeah.
Well, cool. You had something you wanted to share, you want to do that, and then at the end, well, let's jump back into these questions. Tamika, I see you raise your hand. If you want to put it in the chat, I saw your question. We will get to it here in a second.
All right. Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Right. Great. All right. Well, I'm Angela Williamson, CVA with my Volunteer Engagement Accelerator Consulting, and I am a CVA. I love that organization and also Alive. So just a plug for them. If you're not familiar, check them out. Nation International. So it's great. So I just like to start with all my presentations. What's one thing that you want to share? And I would encourage you to write that down, something that you've learned from Josie, something you might be learning in the next couple minutes. And so share that out, share it in LinkedIn, share it with your friends, share it with a colleague, whatever it is. Put it out in the universe so you will learn it better. And then what's one thing that you're going to implement this week? So I just like to think about that. And if you would like to chat more, there's tons. I was looking at the questions in the chat. There's tons of great questions in there. If you want to ping me on LinkedIn, I'm happy to chat on there. So if it's not getting answered here, just shoot me an email. I don't have all the answers. I'm not like, everything, but I will tell you if I don't know, but I'll give you some ideas on where to go. So before the application, Josie did an awesome presentation about the onboarding. I wanted to talk about before that, because before the application, there's what they get to. So the volunteer is going to go online, and what do they see? What does that look like? So how easy is your website to find? How easy is it to navigate? How many clicks does it take? What does it tell them? Again, expectations. So I'm big on that. Set the tone and the expectations. What do your pictures look like? What does the color look like? What are, the font, the style, all of those things? What does that look like? And then who's reviewed it? Have you had a variety of people review your onboarding process? I had a college student help me, and I said from the very beginning, I want you, when you apply to be a volunteer, I need you to write down your notes and say what doesn't work for you. And she made some great observations and some great suggestions. And so get a few variety of people, not like, 50, but get a variety of people that are different ages, maybe different eyesight, clarities or disabilities, backgrounds, whatever it is, like get a variety of people so that they can say that works for me, that doesn't work for me, and make it as accessible for everybody. Learning styles, thinking about training and thinking about input and thinking about how people learn about things. You want to start that from the very beginning. Are they auditory, visual, tactile? And how do you address that on even the beginning onboard, before the onboarding, like in the application, before that? So I'm going to show and tell just a smidgen here on, and again, this isn't the end all be all, right? But it's going to give hopefully some ideas of how I've used Better Impact in how to really onboard and set the tone. And I used the suggestions from the college student. Now, this is the Blood Bank of Delmarva website. And this is the company website. So this is what it looks like. And so this is what the volunteer will see when they get there and they support us and they click on volunteer. Here you go. Now, they have linked this button, volunteer opportunities. And when I click on it, it takes me to, or you to, the volunteer, to this page. This is now Better Impact. But it doesn't look like what Josie showed you, because I tailored it to look like our blood bank side. So you can tailor this, and if your marketing team needs to get involved, they can help you get the right colors and shapes and fonts and whatever, so it matches better. But this is something I've just done on my own to try to match it the best I can. On here, again, thinking about learning and intake styles. There's text. You can embed video. So I have a welcome volunteer video. So I talk about the 20 hours we need and this and that and the requirements and the background checks and how that works. I had to even think about, and people have said, so over here it says, I would like to volunteer. This is actually the live link to actually get to the application. But in my description, I had that box as like, look for this box. But I actually had to say, this is an example. This is not the active link. Look for the box that looks like this for the active link, because not everybody was clicking, and not everybody. Some people were clicking this and they were like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I was like, oh my gosh. So some people are very literal and I am not. And so you just have to take into account, again, have different people review all of this and they will interpret it differently. So it's good to have different people. And so then I have instructions like that are going to be emailed to you. So in Better Impact, I love that there's an email that you can set up as a template that will get emailed to the applicant immediately after they hit submit. In there, you put whatever you want. Welcome applicant. I put in there the next steps. You can put links. You can put all sorts of things. So that's a great thing that I love about this whole onboarding process is I'm trying to set that tone from the very beginning that I'm feeding them information and they have to respond. Like it's up to them. I give them responsibility too. And that's how I want this relationship to work for volunteering with us. And so then as a reminder, I just tried to like step it out for them. The other thing, general interest. So Josie showed some ways of doing things and I use general interest a little differently. You can put them on and make these little boxes. And so in here, I have, these are the roles that I actually use the interest as actual roles that we're applying or looking for volunteers for. So in here, again, there's text for our visuals. There's videos that you can embed. And I'll click on one. So then you get the auditory, you get the text, and there's going to be photos. And so it really reaches all the different people's like learning style. And so now on the picture, you can really see what's it look like. Oh, I'm going to have to set up a tent. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to do that role. So then that's going to kind of filter them out. So maybe they're not going to apply for the ambassador role. And that's okay, because then they don't waste their time. They don't waste our time on, applying and doing this whole ambassador thing when one picture maybe would, change their mind about that. So those are some things that I definitely love about using Better Impact and being able to do that. So, there's just some ideas on that. Let me go through and I should be back onto my PowerPoint. So I just included these just in case my internet wasn't working right. So there we are. So why does this help? I think that putting all of this at the beginning, the expectations, the opportunities, the pictures, and all of those things, I think and I've done this not that long ago. And so time will tell from the numbers, but I feel like less students who were like, I need 10 hours, please. And we're like, oh my gosh, I need 20 hours. Like we're not set up for 10-hour people. And it's really helped us not have as many applicants putting their name in the hat in the ring when it's just not going to work. So that has been helped. So I think it's helping those expectations again. Maybe we're not the right place for them to volunteer. Not that they're bad, not that we're bad, but that's it. So it's been helping. They can make that informed choice. The automatic email, like I said, I love that because then you can put in there whatever you want. You can put links to documents and trainings and things like that within Better Impact, because at that point they've already created their username and password. And that's part of the application link that I didn't show you. When you click the apply application button, then you actually, the volunteer then fills in their name, their address, blah, 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 whatever you put in there that you require them to do. Qualifications, I love the qualifications because Josie talked a little bit about that. It does hold volunteers back from signing up from things or seeing opportunities that they need XYZ training for. So that's definitely, and you can even put expiration dates. So if you're like in healthcare and somebody needs an annual training, they have to revise that everything, then definitely that's a great tool that is really helpful. All right, so what's one thing that you're going to post on LinkedIn? What's one thing that you're going to implement? And again, on my LinkedIn, if you would like to chat with me, I would love that. I dare you all to blow up my my DM inbox on LinkedIn. That would be so cool. Might be a little overwhelming here, but what are there, 280 people? Go for it. I won't get to you all right away, but come on. Send me something. I would love it. So let me know what you've learned, share it, and go from there. So let's answer questions.
I love the dare. It's like it takes me back to like high school. I triple dog dare you.
I know.
That's great. There's some great questions in here.
Great for it. Great, great.
Let's see. Tamika got a really good one. So I think she is in a role where she is doing a lot and is not getting the um, executive director buy-in on the amount of work. Doesn't understand um, the amount of work that she's being put in the full scope of the role. Any suggestions there?
It's a tough one because I think in today's world, it's just so easy to jam all this stuff together. If there's
Yeah.
anywhere that you can DM me, we can try to talk through some of that too, but reach out to other people with your same title or role. Maybe there's people in your local area that do similar things. I know in my role, I'm volunteer and community relations. So I feel your pain with like doing volunteers, and I'm out on community event things on Saturdays or whatever. So the other thing too is, are you delegating to volunteers? Are you developing volunteers to help you? Are you creating administrative help for yourself with volunteers? And you might be already, but that has saved me so many times from being completely wiped out. Although if it's too much, then it's not fair either. And so by finding too much of your own help, then you might be just enabling them to be like, oh, sure, you can do all of that. And it should be two roles. So definitely take a look at the expectations, and maybe that's a clarifying of expectations conversation to say, what is it that you really need me to do? What are you really expecting me to do? What are the outcomes? And realistically, here's the reasons why, yes or no, I can or cannot meet those, and try to have that conversation. But definitely do some research, definitely reach out to other people that have a similar role as you.
I like that. That's much more political than just walking and saying I quit. Right.
Right. Right.
Let's see. I have a healthcare authority that has a solid onboarding process, but it seems that some communities do not appreciate or complain about the process, thinking it's a barrier to volunteering. How would you respond to
Mm.
that?
Yeah, it's true. But if you're in a healthcare situation, the way, like at the blood bank, I say we need to protect the patients, or our case, the donors. And so I think you can definitely say we have vulnerable populations that are in the hospital. And would you want just anybody coming in to wandering into the hospital, into your loved one's hospital room when they're in a compromised situation? And so just putting it into like the safeguards and telling why it is. I think some people just don't understand why some of the roles and the rules are in place. And if it's about getting vaccines or whatever it is, that's a whole hot topic. But the hospitals have to make sure that people are not bringing in things, or they're not taking out things, and that shouldn't be in the wrong places and affecting the world. So there
Yeah,
are definitely responsibilities that you have to talk about that. And maybe, again, maybe that's not the right place for them to volunteer. There's
that is
many other.
correct. Yeah, it's wild. I mean, you rely on volunteers so much, but you still have to protect the organization, right? There are steps that you have to take to check the boxes so you don't become liable if something happens, or if something's procedure is not followed. You want this organization to stay around for the years to come, and a volunteer jumping through the steps and not completing all of them could put you in jeopardy of that. Like, you could destroy everything you've built.
Right. But to Josie's point, definitely keep reviewing. And I would say review. Do you have to have all the steps? And you might,
Absolutely,
but just
absolutely.
review.
Yep. Got one here that says they have a solid onboarding process, but they're dealing with a lot of no-shows. They do not really need background checks or any in-depth applications, but it seems like they need a little advice.
So, two things. One, sometimes the less steps you have to do and the less commitment up front, the less reliable. Not always. I'm not going to say always, but sometimes. The other thing too is I follow up with the no-shows, and I'm like, hey, we really missed you and we couldn't do XYZ, or this didn't happen, or the staff had to go away from whatever they were doing to fill in for. So showing the impact of them not showing up, it may help, it may not help, because it depends on the person and the volunteer. And so there's a few things that you can do. I think reminders, I saw that in the chat. And so, reminding people of their shifts, and I know on Better Impact, you can set up reminders and things like that. So I encourage you to use, whatever platform you're using, create as many automatic reminders, things you can do, or find a volunteer to send out reminders or call them or whatever it is that you need to do. Because I know that we're all now conditioned, because somehow it started where our dentist or our doctor or CarPlay or whatever, we're getting reminders all the time. And I think that we're now conditioned that if we don't get a reminder, it's out of our head, even though it's on our calendar. Unfortunately, whoever started that, which I know they were trying to get no-shows out of the thing, now they've created, whatever has created this thing.
And I think also as an organization, you have to be sensitive to how many reminders you're giving, right? If I get an email every hour from an organization, I become numb to it. And so make sure you're sending targeted communications so they're looking for it.
Yep.
That's great. We had a bunch of questions in the chat that some of them are Better Impact related, and we will get on that. Karen's been in our chat doing a great job. Thank you for Angela and Josie for their participation in this. Just do something, right? Onboard in the right way. Have a process, whatever that may be. You can always adjust it. If you don't have one now, put one in place. If you don't have a piece of software that works, reach out to us. We'd love to help you. There are others on the market as well. There are tools out there that can help you through this process. There's peers. We had hundreds of individuals on this webinar. You're not alone. You're not on an island. Look for user groups, look for networking events, connect with Angela. There's ways that we can make your program more successful. And so, Angela, thank you for your time. We'll see you on the next one.
Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.